She was rejected outside the marriage hall until a vampire king's little girl tugged at her dress and asked, "Can you be my new mom?" Winter bit sharp and unforgiving the evening Clara Dawson's world shattered. Outside Ashford Manor, frost clung to wrought iron gates and ancient stone columns. Inside, golden light poured from crystal chandeliers, casting warm halos across marble floors. Laughter echoed through the grand hall. Families gathered around linen-draped tables, champagne glasses catching candlelight, violins weaving soft melodies through conversations filled with joy. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. Clara stood just inside the entrance, still wearing her wedding gown. The lace sleeves hugged her arms, delicate as spider silk, and the bodice was embroidered with tiny pearls that had taken months to sew. Her veil, pinned carefully into her dark blonde hair that morning by her mother's trembling hands, now felt like a weight pressing down on her skull. She had walked through these doors an hour ago believing she was about to become someone's wife. She had been wrong. The table reserved for the bride and groom sat in the center of the hall, decorated with white roses and flickering pillar candles. 2 chairs, 2 place settings, 2 crystal glasses waiting to toast a future that would never come. Clara sat in hers alone. She smoothed the silk skirt over her lap for the 3rd time, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Guests had stopped looking directly at her now, offering only sidelong glances filled with pity or discomfort. The whispers had started 20 minutes ago, after her fiancé stood at the entrance, not inside, but outside, where everyone waiting to enter could hear him, and announced clearly, coldly, that he couldn't go through with it. "I can't marry someone I don't love," he'd said, his voice cutting through the murmur of arriving guests. "I thought I could, but I can't." Then he left. Just walked away. Didn't even look back. The wedding coordinator had ushered Clara inside with frantic apologies, suggesting she sit, rest, and gather herself. But there was no gathering that had just been torn apart. Clara had nodded numbly and let herself be guided to the table, where she now sat surrounded by celebration meant for her. She wasn't crying. Not yet. The tears were there, building like a storm behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people who had come to witness her happiness and instead found her humiliation. Her throat ached. Her chest felt hollow. This wasn't just about him. It was about every moment she'd convinced herself she was enough. Every time she'd believed that trying harder, being kinder, waiting longer would make someone stay. Every promise that dissolved the moment she needed it to hold. She had turned down a weekend trip with her sister for this. Told her parents she'd see them at the reception. Spent her savings on this dress. Clara reached for her small clutch purse resting near the candle. She couldn't stay here. Not one more second. But before her fingers closed around the clasp, a small voice rose from beside her chair. "Excuse me. Why do you look so sad?" Clara froze. She turned her head slowly. Standing next to the table was a little girl, no older than 3, with hair so pale it seemed to glow silver white under the chandelier light. She wore a dress that shimmered faintly pink and cream, and perched on her head was a delicate tiara that caught the light like ice. In her small arms, she clutched a knitted teddy bear, its button eyes staring up at Clara with the same quiet curiosity as the child. The girl's eyes were extraordinary, pale blue, almost luminous, as though lit from within by some distant star. She blinked up at Clara with perfect seriousness. "Do you need a hug?" she asked softly. "Hugs help when people feel broken." Something inside Clara cracked. Not from pain this time, but from the sudden, unbearable tenderness of being seen by someone so small, so innocent, so unafraid of her grief. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her vision blurred. A voice followed, low and careful, edged with quiet authority. Elira. Clara looked up. A man stood a few steps behind the child. Tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair that fell just slightly across his brow and eyes the color of smoke and shadow. He wore a black suit that fit him like it had been tailored by someone who understood power, and when he moved, the candlelight nearest him flickered, as though the flames themselves leaned away. He wasn't smiling, but his expression was gentle, concerned. He stepped forward slowly, resting one hand lightly on the child's shoulder. "I apologize," he said, his voice quiet but resonant, the kind that seemed to carry weight even when spoken softly. "My daughter is very perceptive. She doesn't always understand boundaries." Clara blinked quickly, trying to clear her vision. Her voice caught. "She's sweet." The man studied her for a moment, not intrusively, but as though he could see past the carefully held composure, past the elegant gown and perfect posture, straight into the wound bleeding beneath. Without a word, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a crisp white handkerchief, folded neatly. He placed it gently on the table beside her untouched glass of water. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her space, just set it there and stepped back. A kindness so simple it made her throat tighten all over again. Then he crouched beside the little girl, Elira, bringing himself to her eye level. "Sweetheart," he said gently, his tone shifting into something softer, warmer. "Sometimes people carry sadness that's very heavy. When we see that, we must be extra gentle. Do you understand?" Elira nodded slowly, her tiara catching the light. "I'm being gentle, Papa. She feels warm." The man's expression shifted, just slightly, a flicker of something Clara couldn't name. Surprise. Perhaps concern. He glanced back at Clara, and for just a heartbeat, the air between them seemed to still. The candles on the table guttered. The shadows near the walls deepened. And Clara felt, for the first time that terrible evening, that she was not invisible. "My name is Mathis," he said quietly, his storm-gray eyes never leaving hers. "Mathis Varen." Clara swallowed hard, her pulse quickening for reasons she didn't understand. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Dawson." Elira smiled, a bright, innocent thing, and reached out to touch Clara's hand where it rested on the table. Her fingers were impossibly cold, but her voice was as warm as summer. "I knew I'd find you," Elira said simply. "I dreamed about you." And in that moment, as the wedding that should have been hers dissolved into memory, Clara Dawson's life turned toward something she could never have imagined. Something ancient, something waiting, something that had been watching her long before tonight. Clara didn't know it yet, but the rejection that had broken her heart had been no accident. Forces she couldn't see had been circling her for months, and the man now standing before her, calm, regal, impossibly still, was the only thing standing between her and a danger she didn't yet understand. Clara's hand trembled as she reached again for her purse. She needed to leave, needed air, needed to be anywhere but here, surrounded by strangers and their pity, sitting at a table meant for two. "I should go," she whispered, more to herself than to them. But as she began to rise, Mathis spoke. "Please." His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made her pause. "Allow me a moment." It wasn't a command. It was a request, grave, careful, edged with something that sounded almost like concern. Clara looked up at him, uncertain. Elira's small hand tightened around hers. The child's fingers were still impossibly cold, but her grip was firm, insistent. "Don't go yet," Elira said softly, her luminous eyes wide. "You're still sad." Clara's throat closed. She couldn't explain why the child's words affected her so deeply, why this stranger's touch felt like the only anchor keeping her from shattering completely. Mathis studied Clara's face for a long moment, then spoke again, his tone measured. "You're in shock. I don't think you should be alone right now." He paused, glancing briefly at the guests still stealing looks in their direction. "May I escort you home? My daughter and I will see you safely there, and then we'll leave. You have my word." Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to insist she was fine, that she didn't need help from a man she'd just met. But she wasn't fine, and somehow he knew it. "All right," she heard herself say. Mathis nodded once, a subtle dip of his head. "Thank you." The winter air hit Clara like a slap the moment they stepped outside Ashford Manor. She pulled her coat, hastily thrown over her wedding gown, tighter around her shoulders, but the cold seemed to seep through anyway. Elira walked between them, still clutching Clara's hand on one side and her father's on the other. The little girl hummed softly, a tune Clara didn't recognize, light and lilting as they moved down the stone steps toward the empty street. The manor stood on the edge of the old district, where gas lamps still lined the sidewalks and narrow lanes wound between buildings that had stood for centuries. At this hour, the street should have been quiet but visible under the soft glow of the lamps. Instead, the moment Mathis stepped past the first lamppost, its light flickered, then dimmed. Clara glanced back at it, frowning. The bulb had been burning bright just seconds ago. "Power surges," she muttered, trying to convince herself. But then it happened again. The second lamp they passed guttered low, its flame shrinking as though something had drawn the warmth from it. And the third. And the fourth. Clara's breath misted in the air, thicker now, colder than it had been even moments before. She shivered, pulling her coat tighter, but the chill wasn't just outside. It pressed against her skin, sank into her bones. "Are you cold?" Mathis asked, his voice breaking the silence. "A little," Clara admitted, though little felt like an understatement. He said nothing, but she noticed he shifted slightly, placing himself between her and the wind. They walked in silence for another block. Clara tried to focus on the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement, the distant hum of traffic from the main road, anything to ground herself. But the shadows were wrong. She saw it from the corner of her eye, movement where there should have been stillness. The darkness pooling near alleyways seemed to stretch, to ripple, as though something beneath the surface was stirring. "You're imagining it," she told herself firmly. "You're exhausted. You're hurt. Your mind is playing tricks." But then Mathis spoke again, and his words pulled her back. "Elira doesn't usually speak to strangers," he said quietly, his gaze fixed ahead. "In fact, she rarely speaks to anyone outside our household." Clara glanced down at the little girl, who was still humming, still holding her hand with that unnaturally cold grip. "She seems very brave," Clara offered. "She is." Mathis's expression softened. "But this, what she's doing now, approaching you, holding your hand, speaking so openly." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's unprecedented." Clara didn't know what to say to that. Elira looked up suddenly, her pale eyes bright even in the dim light. "I told you, Papa. I dreamed about her." Mathis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Clara asked gently, crouching slightly to meet the child's gaze. Elira smiled, a pure, innocent expression. "I see you in my sleep. Lots of times. You're always glowing. Warm like sunshine." She reached up with her free hand and touched Clara's cheek, her fingertips featherlight. "I waited for you." The moment Elira's hand made contact, the air shifted. Mathis moved, fast, faster than Clara thought possible, stepping forward and placing a hand on Elira's shoulder, pulling her back just slightly. Not roughly, but protectively. His eyes were fixed on Clara, sharp and assessing, as though he were seeing something she couldn't. "Papa?" Elira looked confused. "It's all right," he said softly, though his gaze didn't leave Clara's face. "I just need to be careful." Clara's pulse quickened. Careful of what? Before he could answer, a voice cut through the night. "Well, well, look who it is." Clara turned. A man stumbled out from a side street. One of the wedding guests, his tie loosened, his face flushed with alcohol. She recognized him vaguely. Someone's cousin, maybe. He grinned sloppily, swaying slightly as he approached. Clara Dawson, the bride who got ditched. He laughed, harsh and cruel. Guess he figured out what the rest of us already knew. You're not worth the trouble, sweetheart. Clara's stomach twisted. She opened her mouth to respond, to say anything, but no words came. Mathis stepped forward. The temperature dropped. Leave, Mathis said, his voice low, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. The man blinked, his grin faltering. Who the hell are? Mathis's eyes flashed. Not figuratively, not metaphorically. They flashed, a burst of silver light that cut through the darkness like lightning, inhuman and unmistakable. The drunk guest staggered backward, his face draining of color. He didn't say another word, just turned and ran, his footsteps echoing down the empty street. Clara stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest. Mathis turned back to her slowly. His eyes were gray again, normal, but Clara had seen it. She had seen it. You're not. Her voice came out barely a whisper. You're not human. Mathis didn't deny it, didn't explain. He simply held her gaze, steady and unflinching. No, he said quietly. I'm not. Clara took a step back, her heart pounding. Alira squeezed her hand. Don't be scared. Papa's nice. But before Clara could respond, before she could process what she'd just witnessed, the shadows around them deepened. And then, impossibly, Mathis and Alira simply faded. Not walk away, not turned and left. Faded into the darkness, like smoke dissolving into night air. Clara stood alone on the empty street, trembling, breathless, her mind racing. But beneath the terror, beneath the confusion, she felt something else. Something she couldn't explain. She felt safe, and she had no idea why. Clara woke to pale sunlight streaming through her apartment window, her wedding dress still draped over the chair where she'd left it the night before. For one blissful moment, she forgot. Then it all crashed back. The rejection, the whispers, the empty chair across from hers, and the man whose eyes had flashed silver in the dark. She sat up slowly, pressing her palms against her face. It didn't happen, she told herself. You were in shock, exhausted. Your mind invented it. People didn't vanish into shadows. Little girls didn't have eyes like starlight. Men didn't make the air itself bend around them. It was a hallucination. She repeated it like a mantra as she showered, dressed in jeans and an oversized sweater, and made coffee she didn't drink. By mid-morning, she'd almost convinced herself. Then she looked out her window and saw Alira sitting on the front steps of her building. Clara's breath caught. The little girl sat perfectly still, her pale hair catching the winter sunlight, her pink dress somehow immaculate despite the cold. The knitted bear rested in her lap, and she stared up at Clara's second-floor window as though she'd known exactly where to look. Clara stumbled back from the glass, heart hammering. No, 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 no. She grabbed her coat and flew down the stairs, shoving open the building's front door. Alira looked up and smiled. Good morning. What are you? Clara's voice cracked. How did you find me? I followed the warm feeling, Alira said simply, as though that explained everything. Before Clara could respond, a figure rounded the corner of the building, moving with swift, purposeful strides. Mathis. He looked different in daylight, or perhaps it was just that Clara could see him more clearly now. The sharp lines of his face, the way his dark coat seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, the tension radiating from his shoulders. He stopped when he saw Clara, and something like relief flickered across his expression before it hardened into controlled composure. Miss Dawson. He inclined his head slightly. I apologize. She slipped away from, he hesitated. From home. I've been searching for her since dawn. Clara stared at him, then at Alira, then back at him. This is real. You're real. Yes. Last night wasn't. No, Mathis said quietly. It wasn't a dream. Clara's knees felt weak. She gripped the iron railing beside her. Mathis's expression shifted, concern breaking through his carefully maintained distance. May I speak with you? Privately? There are things you need to understand. I don't want to understand, Clara said, her voice shaking. I want you to leave. Alira stood, clutching her bear. Please don't be scared. I'm not scared, Clara lied. I can't. Please, Maida said, and the single word carried such quiet intensity that Clara found herself nodding before she could stop herself. They sat in Clara's small living room, Maida on the edge of the couch, Alira beside him, and Clara in the armchair across from them, her hands gripped tightly in her lap. Maida didn't waste time. Your fiancé didn't leave you by choice, he said. Clara blinked. What? He was influenced, manipulated. Mathis's gray eyes held her steadily. By a faction that has been watching you for months. That's insane, Clara whispered. Is it? Mathis leaned forward slightly. Think back. Were there moments, nights when you felt watched? Shadows that seemed wrong? Times when your fiancé changed suddenly, without explanation. Clara opened her mouth to deny it, but the words died in her throat. Because she had noticed things. The shadow outside her bedroom window 3 weeks ago, too tall, too still to be a tree. The nightmares that had started in late autumn, always the same. Dark figures circling her, whispering words she couldn't understand. And James, her fiancé. He'd been warm, attentive, loving. Then one morning he'd woken up cold, distant, like something fundamental had shifted overnight. No, Clara said, shaking her head. People change their minds. It happens. Not like that. Mathis's voice was gentle but firm. Not that abruptly. Not without reason. Why would anyone? Clara's voice broke. Why would anyone care about me? Mathis exchanged a glance with Alira, who nodded solemnly. There's a prophecy, he said carefully. An old one. It speaks of a human woman with a warm aura, a presence that can be felt by certain beings. A woman who will shift the balance of power in ways we don't yet understand. Clara laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You think I'm some kind of, what? Chosen one. I think, Mathis said quietly, that my daughter recognized you the moment she saw you. And Alira's instincts have never been wrong. Alira climbed down from the couch and approached Clara slowly. You glow, she said softly, like a candle in a dark room. I see it even when I close my eyes. Clara stared at the child, her chest tightening. This is insane, she whispered. I know it's difficult to accept, Maida said. But you need to understand the danger you're in. The faction that interfered with your wedding, they fear what you represent. They will not stop. Then what am I supposed to do? Clara's voice rose. Hide? Run? Believe in fairy tales? You're supposed to let me protect you. The words hung in the air between them. Clara stood abruptly. I don't need protection. I need you to leave. Mathis rose as well, his movements careful, controlled. Miss Dawson.
No.
Clara backed toward the door. This is too much. I can't, I won't. Mathis stepped closer, and his voice dropped, becoming softer, almost soothing. Clara.
Please.
Calm yourself. You're safe here. Something in his tone shifted, became layered, resonant, like music played beneath words. Clara felt it wash over her, warm and gentle, trying to ease the panic clawing at her chest.
Trying.
But failing. The fear didn't lessen. The racing of her heart didn't slow. She stood there, trembling but clear-minded, and watched Mathis's expression shift from calm assurance to shock. What? His voice was barely a whisper. How are you? What did you just try to do to me? Clara demanded. Mathis took a step back, his composure fracturing. That's not possible. No human can resist. He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. You are not ordinary. Stop saying that. It's the truth. Mathis's eyes were wide now, almost afraid. Clara, you just resisted a compulsion that should have calmed you instantly. That has never failed. Not in 1,000 years. Clara's blood ran cold. Get out, Clara.
Get out.
Elira's face crumpled. Tears welled in her luminous eyes. Please don't send us away.
Please.
I need you. The child reached for Clara, her small hands outstretched. And Clara felt something inside her chest tear in two. But the fear was louder than the guilt. I'm sorry, Clara whispered, her own tears starting to fall. I'm so sorry, but I can't do this. She stepped to the door, opened it, and stood there waiting. Matus gathered Elira gently, lifting her into his arms even as the little girl sobbed against his shoulder. Clara, he said one last time, his voice raw. When you're ready, when you believe me, I will be here. Then he carried his crying daughter out into the hallway. Clara slammed the door behind them and collapsed against it, sliding down to the floor. Outside, she could hear Elira's broken voice. She doesn't want us, Papa. Why doesn't she want us? And Clara pressed her hands over her mouth to muffle her own sobs, torn between the terror of what she'd just learned and the unbearable guilt of breaking a little girl's heart. Clara lasted 3 days before her resolve began to crack. She went to work at the small bookstore where she'd been employed for 2 years, shelving novels and ringing up customers with mechanical efficiency. She avoided her phone, ignored concerned texts from friends, and told herself that if she just kept moving forward, the strangeness would fade. It didn't. On Tuesday afternoon, as Clara stood on a ladder reorganizing the classics section, a familiar voice drifted up from below. I like stories about princesses. Clara's hands froze on a copy of Jane Eyre. She looked down. Elira stood at the base of the ladder, her knitted bear tucked under one arm, her pale hair tied back with a silver ribbon. She wore a navy coat that looked far too elegant for a 3-year-old, and her starlit eyes were fixed on Clara with unwavering focus. How did you? Clara climbed down quickly, glancing around the store. Where's your father? Coming, Elira said simply. I walked fast. The bell above the door chimed, and Matus entered, his expression tight with frustration and something that looked like exhaustion. His eyes found Elira immediately, then shifted to Clara. I apologize. Again. Clara set the book down on the nearest shelf. Does she do this often? Every day since we left your apartment. Matus moved closer, lowering his voice.
She dreams about you.
Every night. And when she wakes, she insists on finding you. Elira tugged on Clara's sleeve. Can you read to me? Just one story. Clara looked at the little girl, at the hope shining in those impossible eyes, and felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. One story, she heard herself say. By Thursday, Clara had stopped being surprised when Elira appeared. Outside her apartment building after work, sitting on the steps with perfect patience. At the coffee shop where Clara tried to lose herself in a novel, standing beside her table with a quiet hello. At the library where Clara had gone specifically to hide, somehow finding her in the farthest corner of the 3rd floor. Each time, Matus followed within minutes, apologetic, strained, but never angry. Never harsh with his daughter. And each time, Clara found herself staying a little longer. She helped Elira tie her shoes when the laces came undone on the library steps. She bought the child hot chocolate at the coffee shop and listened as Elira explained, with complete seriousness, that her favorite color was moon silver. She read picture books in quiet corners, Elira nestled against her side, while Matus stood at a respectful distance, watching. Clara caught him staring once, his gray eyes fixed not on his daughter, but on her, on the way she gently tucked a strand of Elira's hair behind the child's ear. His expression was unguarded at that moment. Vulnerable. It made Clara's chest ache in ways she didn't want to examine. Friday evening, Clara walked home from the bookstore as dusk settled over the city. The streets were crowded with weekend traffic, people hurrying home or out to dinner, their breath misting in the cold air. She didn't notice the figure on the rooftop, but Matus did. He materialized from the shadows of an alley just as Clara reached her building, his sudden appearance making her jump. You need to stop doing that, Clara said, pressing a hand to her racing heart. We need to talk. His voice was urgent, his usual composure frayed at the edges. Where's Alira? Safe. At home. Mathis glanced up at the roofline across the street, his jaw tightening. You're being watched. Clara followed his gaze, but saw nothing. By who? The same faction I warned you about. He looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw real fear in his eyes. Clara, staying away from me won't protect you. It will only leave you vulnerable. I'm not staying away, Clara said quietly. I haven't been. Not really. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or hope. Alira has bonded with you completely, he said. And these people, these beings, they know it. They're watching to see what you'll do. What I'll do. What do they want? To prevent the prophecy from unfolding. Mathis stepped closer, his voice dropping. To eliminate you before you become what they fear. Clara's breath caught. And what is that exactly? I don't know yet. The admission seemed to cost him. But I know you're in danger. And I know that Alira is right about you, even if I can't explain how or why. A cold wind swept down the street, carrying with it the scent of winter and something else, something sharp and metallic that made Clara's skin prickle. Mathis tensed. You felt that. It wasn't a question. What was it? Clara whispered. A warning. He looked at her directly, his gray eyes intense. There's an event tomorrow night. A gathering of the supernatural court. I want you to come with me. Why would I? Because you need to understand what world you've stepped into. His voice was firm but not unkind. You need to see who I am, what Alira is, and what's at stake. If you still want to walk away after that, I won't stop you. Clara hugged her arms around herself. And if I say no, then I'll post guards around your building and hope it's enough. Mathis's expression darkened. But hope is a poor defense against what's coming. Clara looked up at the empty roofline, then back at Mathis. She thought of Alira's bright smile, the way the little girl had fallen asleep against her shoulder in the library yesterday while Clara read about dragons and castles. She thought of the dreams she'd been having, the same ones Mathis had asked about. Shadows circling, whispers and languages she didn't know. If I come, Clara said slowly, will Alira be there? Yes. And you promise I can leave whenever I want. You have my word. Clara exhaled slowly, watching her breath mist in the air. Every rational part of her screamed that this was insane, that she should run far away from vampire kings and prophecies and children who glowed with starlight. But a quieter voice, one she'd been trying to ignore, whispered that running hadn't protected her from anything. And that maybe, impossibly, she'd already made her choice the moment she'd read that first story to Alira.
Fine, she said.
I'll come. Relief flooded Mathis's features. Thank you. But this doesn't mean... I know. He held up a hand, one step at a time. Clara nodded, then turned toward her building. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. Clara. She looked back. Alira asked me to tell you something. Mathis's expression softened. She said you give the best hug she's ever had. Better than anyone except her mother. Clara's throat tightened. Her mother died when Alira was just a few months old. Pain flickered across his face, ancient and deep. She doesn't remember her, but somehow she says you feel the same. Warm and safe. Clara didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded and hurried inside before the tears could fall. Behind her, Mathis remained on the street, his gaze lifting once more to the rooftops. The dark figure was gone, but he could still feel its presence, hovering at the edges of his awareness like a blade waiting to fall. Tomorrow, he murmured to the empty air. And then she'll understand. He vanished into shadow, leaving only the faint scent of winter and the echo of Clara's heartbeat still thrumming in his heightened senses. Above, on a building 3 blocks away, the Watcher smiled and began to plan. The palace rose from the earth like something carved from moonlight and shadow. Clara stood before its iron gates, her breath misting in the frigid air, and tried to convince herself she could still turn back. She couldn't. Mavis stood beside her, dressed in formal attire, a black suit that seemed to absorb the starlight, silver embroidery tracing the collar and cuffs in patterns that hurt to look at directly. He'd been quiet during the car ride here, his tension palpable. "You can still change your mind," he said softly. Clara pulled her borrowed coat tighter, a deep burgundy velvet that Mavis had sent to her apartment that morning along with a simple black dress. "I gave my word. Words can be taken back. Not mine." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. Or concern. The gates swung open without anyone touching them. Clara's pulse quickened as they walked through, onto grounds that seemed to exist outside of time. Ancient oaks lined a cobblestone path, their bare branches reaching toward a sky that looked too vast, too star-filled to be real. In the distance, the palace itself loomed, stone towers and arched windows, moonlight pooling in courtyards, and everywhere, shadows that moved with purpose. A small figure burst from the palace entrance, running down the path with arms outstretched. Clara. Elira collided with her, wrapping small arms around Clara's waist. The child wore a gown of silver and ice blue, her tiara catching the light, and her smile was so bright it made Clara's chest ache. "You came. Papa said you might not, but I knew you would." Clara knelt, smoothing Elira's hair. "I promised, didn't I?" "You look beautiful," Elira declared, then grabbed Clara's hand. "Come on. Everyone wants to meet you." Mavis cleared his throat gently. "Elira, remember what we discussed. Clara is a guest. She may find tonight overwhelming." "I'll protect her," Elira said with absolute confidence. Clara met Mavis's gaze over the child's head. His expression was conflicted, worry and something softer warring beneath his controlled exterior. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. "Please." Clara nodded. They entered the palace together. The ballroom stole Clara's breath. Vaulted ceilings stretched impossibly high, painted with constellations that actually moved. Chandeliers hung suspended without chains, their crystals chiming softly as they drifted through the air. The floor was polished black marble veined with silver, reflecting the hundreds of candles that floated at shoulder height throughout the massive space.
And the guests.
They were beautiful and terrible all at once. Men and women in gowns and suits that belonged to every century, their skin ranging from marble pale to shadow dark, their eyes gleaming with colors that didn't exist in nature. Some had an otherworldly stillness about them, barely breathing. Others moved with predatory grace that made Clara's instinct scream. Every single one turned to stare when she entered. The whispers started immediately, a rustling like wind through dead leaves. Humans. The king brought a human. The child's choice. Clara's hand tightened around Elira's. Mavis placed himself slightly ahead of them both, his presence a shield. "Ignore them," he murmured. Elira, oblivious to the tension, pulled Clara forward eagerly. "Look, that's the winter court over there. And those are the shadow walkers. And that lady in the green dress is Duchess Vera. She's mean, but her gardens are pretty." Clara tried to smile, tried to focus on Elira's bright chatter rather than the weight of hundreds of ancient eyes dissecting her every movement. They made it halfway across the ballroom. Then Elira stopped in the center of the floor, turned to face the crowd, and announced in a voice that rang like a bell. "Everyone, this is Clara. She's going to be my new mom." The world stopped. Every conversation died. Every movement froze. The silence was so absolute that Clara could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Then the gasps came, shocked, scandalized, excited. "The king has chosen. A human queen." The prophecy. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Elira, I didn't." But the damage was done. She saw it ripple through the crowd, the nobles leaning together, whispering urgently. The enemies Mavis had warned her about, their eyes gleaming with sudden interest. The shock on every face. And Mavis. He stood frozen, his expression shattered between horror and panic. Then he moved. His hand closed around Clara's arm, not gently, not carefully, but with urgent force. He pulled her toward a side corridor, away from the staring crowd, his grip tight enough to hurt. Mavis. Clara stumbled, trying to keep up. Not here, he said, his voice low and strained. They reached an alcove hidden behind a tapestry. Mavis released her abruptly, stepping back, his hands clenched into fists. Do you understand what just happened? His voice was barely controlled. Do you understand what she just announced to every noble house, every faction, every enemy I have? I didn't know she was going to. They think I've chosen you as queen. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure completely fractured. They think this is an official declaration. You've just become a target for every being who wants to destabilize my rule. The words hit like blows. Clara took a step back, her vision blurring. So pull me aside. Grab me like I'm a problem to be dealt with. Make me feel like. She stopped, her throat closing. Like she was unwanted. Again. Like she was an embarrassment. Again. Clara. Mathis's expression shifted, realization dawning. No, I didn't mean. I need to leave. Clara's voice shook. I need to go.
Now.
Wait, please. But Clara was already moving, pushing past him, back toward the ballroom entrance. She emerged into the vast space to find Alira standing exactly where they'd left her, tears streaming down her small face. Clara, the child called, her voice breaking. Clara's heart splintered. But Mavis was there suddenly, placing himself between them, scooping Alira into his arms even as the child reached desperately over his shoulder. Clara, please. Alira sobbed. Don't go. I didn't mean to make you sad. Let me talk to her. Papa, let me. No, sweetheart. Mathis's voice was gentle but firm. Not right now. The nobility watched avidly, drinking in the drama. Clara couldn't breathe. She turned and ran. Through the marble halls, past the floating candles and moving tapestries, out into the frigid night where the gates were already opening as if the palace itself wanted her gone. Behind her, muffled by stone and distance, she could hear Alira's broken crying. She doesn't want us, Papa. I ruined it. I ruined everything. Clara pressed her hands over her mouth, choking on sobs, and kept running. She'd been right all along. She wasn't meant for this. Wasn't meant to be chosen. The abandoned bride, the unwanted woman. That's all she'd ever be. Even a child's innocent love couldn't change that truth. The palace gates closed behind her with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. And Clara stood alone in the winter darkness, more heartbroken than she'd been even on her wedding day. Because this time, she'd dared to hope. And hope, she now knew, was the cruelest punishment of all. Clara didn't leave her apartment for 3 days. She called in sick to work, ignored her phone, and spent hours sitting by the window watching the street below. Waiting, though she wouldn't admit it, for a little girl with starlit eyes to appear on the steps. Alira never came. Clara told herself it was a relief she felt. Not disappointment. Not the hollow ache that grew deeper with each passing hour. She replayed that moment endlessly, Mathis's hand closing around her arm, the barely controlled panic in his voice, the way he'd pulled her aside like she was a mistake that needed to be corrected. You've just become a target. As if that was her fault. As if she'd asked for any of this. Clara pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her breath fogging the window. She'd been unwanted at her own wedding. And now, impossibly, she'd been unwanted at a vampire ball. Some things, apparently, were universal. Miles away, in a palace chamber lit only by dying embers, Matis Varen drove his fist through solid stone. The wall cracked, chunks of marble crumbling to the floor. His knuckles split, blood welling dark and too slow to be human, but he didn't care. He hit it again.
And again.
Your Majesty. A voice came from the doorway. His advisor, Corvain, ancient and patient. The wall has done nothing to deserve this. Leave me, Mathis said, his voice raw. Elira hasn't eaten in 2 days. She won't sleep. She just sits in the garden and cries. Mathis closed his eyes, the words hitting harder than any physical blow. She asks for Clara constantly. Corvain continued quietly. And you're destroying your own palace. Perhaps it's time to. I terrified her. Mathis's hands trembled as he lowered them. I grabbed her like she was a threat. Made her feel exactly what she spent her whole life feeling, unwanted. Disposable. You were trying to protect her. I failed her. Mathis turned, and his expression was devastated. I failed them both. Corvain studied him for a long moment. Then stop breaking walls and go to her. Explain. Apologize. Fix what you've broken before it's too late. She won't see me. Have you tried? Mathis looked away. The truth was he'd been too afraid. Afraid of seeing that same crushed expression on Clara's face. Afraid of making things worse. Afraid that she was better off without him. The hostile factions are mobilizing, Corvain said, his tone shifting to something darker. They saw what happened at the ball. They know the girl has bonded with a human, and they know you care. They'll strike soon. Post guards around her building.
Double them.
Already done. But, my lord, guards may not be enough. Not if they're truly desperate. Mathis's jaw tightened. Then make them enough. On the 4th day, Clara finally left her apartment. She needed groceries, fresh air, something to break the suffocating cycle of guilt and loneliness. The evening was bitter cold, the sky heavy with clouds that promised snow. Clara pulled her coat tight and walked quickly, keeping her head down. She made it 2 blocks before she felt it, that prickling awareness of being watched.
She stopped, glancing around.
The street was busy, people hurrying past, cars streaming by. Nothing unusual, but the feeling persisted. Clara quickened her pace. A man stepped out from a storefront ahead of her, directly into her path. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and sharp features. His coat was expensive, his posture refined, but his eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, fixed on her with unsettling intensity. Clara Dawson, he said. Not a question. Clara's heart lurched. Do I know you?
No.
But I know you. He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. Or rather, I know what you carry. I don't. The mark, he interrupted softly. Hidden since birth. Dormant until recently. Your mother never told you, did she? Clara took a step back. I don't know what you're talking about. The bloodline of the ancient queens runs through you. Diluted, forgotten, but not gone. He moved closer, his voice dropping. That's why they fear you. Why they manipulated your wedding, your life. They've been trying to keep you from awakening. You're insane. Clara tried to move past him. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His skin was ice cold. The Vampire King doesn't even know the full truth. But I can show you. I can help you understand what you... A sound cut through the air, sharp, piercing. A whistle, maybe. Or a signal. The man's expression changed.
No.
Not yet. They came from everywhere at once. Figures in dark clothing, faces covered by masks, moving with inhuman speed. One grabbed Clara from behind, an arm locking around her waist. Another seized her wrists. Clara screamed. The silver-haired man stumbled back, shouting something, but his words were lost in the chaos. Clara kicked, twisted, fought with everything she had, but they were too strong, too fast. A cloth pressed over her mouth and nose, sharp chemical smell, burning. Her vision swam. The street tilted. She caught a glimpse of the man's face, his expression twisted with what looked like genuine alarm. This wasn't the plan. You'll kill her before. Then his voice cut off abruptly. Blood bloomed across his chest.
He fell.
Clara tried to scream again, but her voice wouldn't work. Her limbs went heavy. Somewhere distant, she heard breaking glass, running footsteps.
Shouts.
Were those Mathis's guards?
Too late. Too far away.
Darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, thick and suffocating. The last thing Clara saw before unconsciousness took her was the street where she'd been standing, empty now except for a spreading pool of blood and a single figure watching from a rooftop, utterly still. Then nothing. In his palace study, Mathis's head snapped up, a sudden cold dread washing through him like ice water. Something was wrong. Something was wrong. He was moving before conscious thought formed, shadows gathering around him, Corvain's startled voice calling after him. But he was already gone, tearing through space itself toward the city, toward Clara's building, his ancient senses screaming danger, loss. Too late, too late, too late. He materialized on the street where his guards lay unconscious, spelled into stillness. The scent of blood hung in the air. A silver-haired corpse sprawled on the pavement. And Clara was gone. Mathis fell to his knees, his control shattering completely, and for the first time in centuries, the Vampire King unleashed a roar of pure anguish that shook windows and sent shadows fleeing in terror. Behind him, in the palace, Alira sat up from where she'd finally fallen into fitful sleep, tears already streaming down her face. "Papa," she whispered to the empty room. "They took her. They took Clara." And somewhere in the darkness, in a place hidden from moonlight and hope, Clara's scream finally escaped her lips as she woke to find herself bound in chains. Clara woke to the cold stone beneath her cheek and the acrid taste of metal on her tongue. Her head throbbed. Her wrists burned where something, chains, she realized dimly, bit into her skin. She tried to move and found herself bound to a circular platform, her arms spread wide, iron cuffs anchored to the floor. Panic surged through her, sharp and immediate.
Awake.
Good. Clara's head snapped toward the voice. A woman stood at the edge of the platform, tall and elegant in dark robes that seemed to absorb light. Her face was ageless, could have been 30 or 300, and her eyes gleamed crimson in the dim glow of candles arranged in precise geometric patterns around the chamber. Behind her, others waited in the shadows.
Silent.
Watching. "What?" Clara's voice came out hoarse. "What is this? Where am I?" "Safe," the woman said, smiling coldly. "For the moment, though not for long." Clara pulled against the chains. They didn't budge. "Let me go." "I'm afraid that's impossible." The woman circled slowly, studying Clara like a specimen. "Do you know what you are, Clara Dawson?" "Human," Clara spat. "Just human."
No.
The woman crouched beside her, tilting her head. "You are descended from the queens of the first night, ancient rulers who commanded power over life and death, who could bend vampire will with a word, who held dominion over our kind for millennia." Clara stared at her. "That's insane. Your bloodline was thought extinct, hunted to extinction, in fact, by those who feared their power." The woman's smile widened. "But blood has memories, and yours remembers what you were bred to become. I don't have any power. Not yet. But the Vampire King's daughter sensed it in you. Recognize you instantly, as children always do. They see what's hidden beneath." The woman stood, her expression hardening. "And when you bonded with her, when the king himself began to fall, you awakened. Your aura strengthened. Soon, you would have been able to command us, control us, reshape our entire world." Clara's pulse hammered. "I don't want to control anyone. Irrelevant. Your existence is a threat." The woman gestured, and two figures stepped forward carrying a ceremonial blade, ornate and ancient. "So, we will erase you. Completely. Your blood will fuel a ritual that ensures no queen ever rises again." Clara's breath came in short, panicked gasps. "You're going to kill me. We're going to unmake you. There's a difference." The blade gleamed in the candlelight as they approached. Clara pulled desperately at the chains, her mind racing, searching for escape that didn't exist. Mathis, she thought wildly. Elira.
Someone. Please.
Mathis tore through the warehouse district like a force of nature. He was no longer the controlled, careful king who moved through human cities with restraint. He was an ancient wrath incarnate, shadow and fury given form. The first group of guards barely saw him coming. He moved through them like a blade through water, shadows erupting from his hands, lifting bodies and hurling them against walls with bone-shattering force. His eyes blazed silver white, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. Where is she? One guard, braver or more foolish than the rest, lunged with a spelled blade. Mathis caught his wrist, twisted, and the man's scream cut short as darkness consumed him whole. Where? Corvain fought beside him, efficient and lethal, but even he looked shaken by the raw power Mathis unleashed. My lord, we need a location. I can feel her. Mathis's voice was barely human. This way. He ran, and the shadows ran with him. In the palace, Elira stood in the center of her room, tears streaming down her face, her small hands pressed to her temples. Northeast, she whispered. Underground. Cold. She's so scared, Papa. She's calling for you. The guards Mathis had left to protect her exchanged worried glances. Princess, you should rest. No. Elira's eyes snapped open, glowing with the same silver light as her father's. I can find her. I can see her. She ran. The guards had no choice but to follow. Elira moved through the palace with impossible certainty, down corridors she'd never walked, through doors that opened at her approach. When she reached the courtyard, she pointed northeast without hesitation.
There.
The old temple ruins. Beneath them. The captain of the guard stared. How could you possibly? Because she's mine, Elira said fiercely. And I won't lose her. She took off running again, and the soldiers, touched by prophecy and bound by duty, followed. The blade descended toward Clara's outstretched arm. She closed her eyes, bracing for pain. The chamber exploded. The stone shattered. Candles extinguished in a wave of impossible darkness. The woman with crimson eyes stumbled back, her expression shifting to shock. He's here. How is he? Mathis materialized in the center of the ritual circle. But he wasn't the man Clara knew. He was taller, wrapped in shadows that moved like living things. His eyes burned with light that hurt to look at directly. When he opened his mouth, his voice resonated with power that made the very air vibrate. Release her. The faction members scattered, but not fast enough. Mathis moved, faster than Clara's eyes could track. One moment, he stood still. The next, 3 attackers lay unconscious, their spelled weapons shattered. The woman in dark robes raised her hands, crimson energy crackling between her fingers. You're too late, Varen. The ritual has. Mathis gestured, and her words choked off. She clawed at her throat, gasping, as shadows coiled around her like serpents.
You.
Touched. Her. Each word fell like a death sentence. Clara watched, frozen, as the vampire king destroyed everyone who stood between him and her with terrifying efficiency. She should have been afraid, but all she felt was overwhelming relief. The chains around her wrists shattered, not unlocked, but shattered, the metal fragmenting into dust. Mathis knelt beside her, and suddenly he was himself again. Human-sized, gray eyes instead of burning silver. But his hands shook as they touched her face, checking for injuries. Clara. Clara, are you hurt? Did they? I'm okay, she whispered. He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. His whole body trembled. I thought I'd lost you, he breathed against her hair. I thought I was too late. Footsteps echoed. Elira burst into the chamber, soldiers behind her, and the little girl's sob of relief cut through the darkness. Clara. Mathis released Clara just enough for Elira to throw herself into the embrace, the 3 of them tangled together on the cold stone floor. You found me, Clara said, her voice breaking. Always, Mathis said fiercely. I will always find you. He stood carefully, lifting Clara in his arms as though she weighed nothing. She was weak, shaking from shock and whatever they'd given her, but alive.
Alive.
As Mathis carried her out of that terrible place, Clara looked up at his face, still strained, still haunted, and did something that surprised them both. She reached up and touched his cheek. Thank you, she whispered. Mathis's expression crumbled. He pressed his forehead to hers, just for a moment, as Alira clung to both of them. Don't thank me, he said roughly. This was my fault. All of it. We'll talk about that later, Clara managed. Right now, just take me home. Where is home? Mathis asked quietly, and Clara, exhausted and terrified and somehow still whole, gave the only answer that felt true. Wherever you and Alira are. Clara's apartment had never felt smaller. Mathis had insisted on escorting her home personally. Alira nestled between them in the car, the little girl's hand clutching Clara's with fierce determination. The palace healers had checked Clara over, pronouncing her physically unharmed despite the ordeal, but the haunted look in Mathis's eyes suggested he didn't quite believe them. Now, standing in her tiny living room as gray pre-dawn light filtered through the windows, Clara felt the weight of the night finally settle over her. You should rest, Mathis said quietly. He stood near the door, maintaining careful distance, as though afraid his presence might shatter her. I'll post guards outside. You'll be safe. Where's Alira? Clara asked. I sent her back with Corvain. She needs sleep. His expression softened. Though she made me promise to tell you she'll visit tomorrow. And the day after. And every day after that if you'll have her. Clara's throat tightened. Of course I'll have her. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Mathis moved toward the door. I should go. Let you rest. Mathis. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe, but didn't turn around. Thank you, Clara said. For saving me. Don't. His voice was rough. Don't thank me for cleaning up a mess I helped create. That's not. It is. He turned then, and his expression was devastated. They took you because of me. Because Alira bonded with you. Because I didn't protect you well enough. Because I made you visible to every enemy I have. His hands clenched. And before that, at the ball, I grabbed you like you were a problem to be managed. Made you feel unwanted. Made you run. You were trying to protect me then too. I hurt you. The words came out broken. I saw in your eyes. That same look you had at the wedding hall when your fiancé left. And I put it there. Clara took a step toward him. Mathis. I need to say this. He held up a hand, stopping her. And then I'll go, I promise. But you need to know, his voice caught. You need to know that what happened at the ball wasn't because you were unwanted. It was because I was terrified. Of what? Of losing you. The confession seemed to cost him everything. Of caring about someone again. Of watching someone he stopped struggling. I lost Alira's mother to violence I couldn't prevent. I've lived in the shadows for centuries, feeling nothing, wanting nothing. And then you appeared, with your warmth and your gentleness, and my daughter chose you instantly. And I. His voice broke completely. I started to feel alive again. And that terrified me more than any enemy ever could. Clara's eyes burned with tears. So you pushed me away. I failed you. Mathis's hands trembled. Not because you weren't worthy. Because I was afraid of what you meant to me. What you both mean to me. The first rays of true dawn crept over the horizon, golden light touching the window. Mathis flinched. Clara saw it. The way his skin began to pale, to smoke faintly where the light touched his hand. You need to go, she said urgently. The sun. I don't care. He didn't move. I won't leave until you hear me. Until you understand that the problem was never you. It was me. My fear. My failure. Mathis, you're burning. Let me burn. His gray eyes held hers, fierce and desperate. Let me stand here in the light and tell you the truth. You are extraordinary, Clara Dawson. You are brave and kind and strong, and Elira saw it immediately. And his voice dropped to a whisper. I see it too. I see you. And I am terrified of how much I need you. Smoke rose from his shoulder, where sunlight streamed through the window. His jaw clenched against what must have been agony, but he didn't move. Clara crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. She grabbed his hand, the one smoking in the light, and pulled. Inside, she said firmly.
Now.
Mavis let her pull him away from the window, deeper into the apartment where shadows still held. The moment the sunlight left his skin, the smoking stopped, but Clara could see the burns already forming. You're an idiot, she said, her voice shaking. Standing in sunlight. What were you thinking? That I'd rather burn than let you believe you weren't wanted. Clara looked up at him. This ancient, powerful king who'd just destroyed an entire faction to save her, now standing in her cramped apartment with burned skin and desperate eyes. I was scared too, she admitted quietly, of being hurt again, of believing someone wanted me and discovering I was wrong, of hoping. Clara. But I can't keep running from hope. She held his gaze. And I can't keep pretending I don't want this.
You.
Elira. All of it. Mavis stared at her as though she'd just offered him the sun itself. Even after everything, he whispered. Even knowing the danger? Especially after everything. Before either could say more, the apartment door burst open. Elira stood in the doorway, still in her nightgown, Corvain looking apologetic behind her. She insisted, he said helplessly. Said she felt Clara chose you. Elira ran into the apartment, throwing herself at Clara with enough force to nearly knock her over. Small arms wrapped around Clara's waist, and the child's tearful voice rose, muffled against her sweater. You're staying? Are you really staying? Clara knelt, gathering Elira into her arms properly. I'm staying. Forever. Clara looked up at Mavis, who was watching them with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. Yes, Clara said softly. Forever. Elira sobbed, happy, relieved, and clung tighter. Mavis knelt beside them, completing the circle, his arms wrapping around both Clara and his daughter. I choose you both, Clara whispered into the space between them. I choose this. Mathis' forehead pressed against hers, his eyes closed, his breath shaking. I choose you too. Both of you. I choose this family. Elira looked up, her face bright despite the tears. We're a family now? A real family? Yes, sweetheart, Clara said, smoothing the child's hair. A real family. Outside, dawn broke fully over the city, golden and bright. But inside Clara's small apartment, wrapped in shadows and warmth and the first real happiness any of them had felt in far too long, the light that mattered most was already shining. And this time, Clara thought, touching Mathis's face while Elira giggled between them, this time the light wouldn't fade. This time she was home. 2 weeks later, Mathis appeared at Clara's apartment with a request that made her stomach flip. I want to take you somewhere, he said, standing in her doorway with Elira holding his hand. If you'll trust me. Clara had learned what those words meant from him. Not a demand, always a question. Always leaving her the choice. Where? She asked, though she was already reaching for her coat. You'll see. The car wound through familiar streets as evening settled over the city. Clara recognized the route, had driven it herself once months ago, her heart full of nervous hope. When Ashford Manor came into view, her breath caught. Mavis. Trust me, he said quietly, his hand finding hers. The building looked different at night.
Softer.
The stone facade was bathed in warm light from within, and as they approached, Clara could see candles glowing in the windows. Her wedding hall. The place where everything had shattered. Why are we here? Clara's voice came out smaller than she intended. Elira squeezed her other hand. You'll like it, Papa promised. Mathis helped her from the car, his touch gentle and steady. I wanted to replace a memory, he said. If you'll let me. Clara's heart hammered as they walked through the entrance. Not the grand front doors where guests had once streamed in, but a side entrance that led directly to the ballroom. The doors opened. Clara stopped breathing. The hall was transformed. Gone were the crowds, the pitying stares, the whispers. Instead, the vast space was intimate, peaceful. Candles floated at eye level, casting golden light across the polished floor. White roses, the same ones that had decorated her wedding table, filled every corner, but arranged differently now. Wildly, joyfully, without the rigid perfection of before. And in the center of the room, where Clara had once sat alone, a single table waited. 3 chairs, 3 place settings, 3 crystal glasses catching candlelight. Clara's vision blurred. Mathis. The first time you came here, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You were abandoned, left alone at a table meant for 2. I can't erase that pain, but I can offer you something new. Elira tugged Clara forward, practically bouncing with excitement. Come see. Come see. They walked to the table together. Clara's hands trembled as she took in the details, the linen cloth, the flickering candles, the flowers arranged with care. But it was the 3rd chair that made tears spill over. Small, child-sized, with a cushion embroidered with stars. This is where I sit, Elira announced proudly. Because we're a family now. Families eat together. Clara sank into one of the chairs, not the bride's chair from before, but a new one, positioned so she could see both Mathis and Elira clearly. Mathis remained standing, his gray eyes reflecting candlelight and something deeper. Something that looked like hope. Clara Dawson, he said, and his voice carried through the empty hall with quiet power. You came to this place expecting a beginning and found only an ending. You sat at a table alone, believing you were unwanted. Clara nodded, unable to speak. I cannot give you the wedding you lost, Mathis continued. I cannot promise you a normal life, or safety from every danger, or a future without complications. He moved around the table, approaching slowly and then, impossibly, the ancient vampire king lowered himself to one knee before her. Elira's eyes went wide. Papa. But I can promise you this, Mathis said, his gaze never leaving Clara's face. I will choose you every day. I will stand between you and every threat. I will honor the warmth you bring to our lives, and I will never, never make you feel unwanted again. His hand reached for hers, and when she gave it, his fingers wrapped around hers with reverent care. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said. Not yet. Not until you're ready for that question. But I'm asking something deeper. What? Clara whispered. Be our family. His voice broke on the words. Not because of prophecy or politics or anything supernatural, but because we choose you. Because Elira needs you. Because he swallowed hard. Because I love you. And I want to build a life with you. Here. In whatever form that takes. Elira launched herself from her chair, throwing her arms around Clara's neck. Say yes. Please say yes. I want you to be my mommy for real. Clara looked at the little girl, this bright, brave child who'd approached a crying bride and offered a hug, who'd seen warmth in Clara when Clara had felt only cold. Then she looked at Mathis, this powerful, ancient being who'd knelt before her with tears in his eyes, who'd stood in sunlight and burned rather than let her feel unwanted, who'd torn apart enemies to save her, who'd given her a choice, always a choice. Yes, Clara said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Yes to all of it. Mathis rose, and his arms wrapped around both her and Elira, pulling them close. Clara felt his chest shake with silent emotion, felt Elira's delighted laughter against her shoulder. We're a family, Elira announced to the empty hall. A real family. Mathis pressed his lips to Clara's forehead, then to Elira's hair. The realest one I've ever had, he murmured. They stood like that for a long moment, tangled together in the place where Clara's heart had once broken. Then Elira wriggled free, tugging them both toward the table. "Come on. Papa said there's cake. And hot chocolate for me." Clara laughed, a real, genuine laugh, and let herself be pulled into the chair. Mavis sat beside her, and Elira climbed into her small chair, beaming. As they settled around the table, the three of them, together, Clara looked around the hall that had witnessed her deepest humiliation. It didn't hurt anymore. The memories were still there, but they'd been transformed, rewritten. This was no longer the place she'd been rejected. It was the place she'd been found. "What are you thinking?" Mavis asked softly, his hand finding hers beneath the table. Clara smiled, squeezing his fingers. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just doorways. We just can't see where they lead until we walk through them." Elira raised her glass of hot chocolate solemnly. "To doorways." Mavis lifted his glass, his eyes warm. "To new beginnings." Clara raised her own glass, looking at the vampire king who loved her and the little girl who'd chosen her, and felt something settle deep in her chest.
Peace.
Belonging.
Home. To my family, she said.
Their glasses clinked together, the sound ringing clear and bright through the candlelit hall. And outside, as if in benediction, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and quiet and full of promise. Inside, at a table where heartbreak had once lived, three souls who'd found each other against all odds sat together and began the story of their future. Not perfect, not simple,
but theirs.
And that, Clara thought as Elira giggled and Mavis smiled and candlelight danced across their faces, was more than enough. It was everything.
The end.